Well, welcome everyone to the first in our series of three webinars sponsored by the Borders and Governance Lab at the University of Victoria. As borders worldwide face unprecedented challenges from shifting geopolitical tensions to climate migration, the need for evidence-based policy has never been more crucial. The Borders and Governance Lab stands at this critical intersection, connecting international research to practical policy solutions through its global network of scholars and cross-border organizations. Today's discussion is part of the lab's mission to build excellence in border knowledge and advanced border management practices, both in Canada and across the globe. Now, I'm so delighted to have you all join us as we explore innovative approaches to some of the most pressing border governance challenges of our time. Please join the discussion via the Q&A function. We will save time at the end to respond to a few of your questions. So, without further delay, it is my pleasure to introduce our distinguished guest, Jean Peyrony. Jean is a distinguished expert in cross-border cooperation and territorial development. He is the Director General of the Mission Opérationnelle Transfrontalière, an organization that supports cross-border cooperation projects and policies across European borders. Jean has contributed significantly to the development of border region governance frameworks, cross-border cooperation mechanisms, and European territorial cohesion, with a particular attention to border regions as laboratories for European cooperation. Jean, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and hello, everybody.
So, Jean, I want to start and sort of pick up on the idea of border territories as laboratories for European cooperation. Could you explain this concept and share examples of how border regions have served as testing grounds for certainly innovative European policies?
Yes, well, as you know, the European project is about single market. It's about free movement of people and goods across all sorts of borders. And it's also about social cohesion, not only a free zone, but a project of also political integration at a continental scale. And this is where cross-border regions are or should be the most positively impacted. Cross-border regions represent around 30% of the population. And you have all sorts of borders, all sorts of cross-border regions. You have, for instance, big cross-border metropolises. I think of Genève, or I think of Copenhagen and Malmö at the border between Sweden and Denmark. Genève is on the French-Swiss border. There are more than 100,000 cross-border workers. So it shows clearly that there is a sort of single market of working. And Genève is also probably the most integrated cross-border public transport system all over the world. So in that case, you have local authorities and national authorities that have managed to design and to fund a very efficient cross-border public service. And so typically, it's a good example of what we also intend to do at the European level, which is really economic and functional integration. But I could also talk about a different sort of border, like a mountainous border. And in that case, I move to the border between France and Spain. There is a cross-border region, which is a plateau, a mountainous plateau, where there is rather sparsely populated areas. And in that case, there was no hospital because they were not profitable on each side of the border. And they had the idea to make a cross-border hospital working as well for French and Spanish patients. And in that case, it also shows what we try to do in Europe. That's to say, to act in common with common policies like health at the benefit of the territories and at the benefit of the populations.
Now, it's clear that there's many moving parts in this reality. And so then certainly a goal within this process is that integration is reliant on coordinating diverse networks of stakeholders, the many moving parts here. So how has this multi-level approach evolved over time? And obviously, it didn't just happen. It's taken work and it's taken sort of the connection of these stakeholders. So how have you made this work, and what's the effective element of this cross-border relationship?
Yes, thank you. So it's obvious that fundamentally, cross-border cooperation is about local stakeholders working across the border. And in Europe, basically, it started from the local. And progressively, the European Union thought of helping also these border areas and created a policy which is a cohesion policy with a strand which is Interreg, which helps the local authorities to work together and gives them some funding. But it was not enough. And in France, they had the idea that there should be also a sort of coordination of states, because it's not only about states just leaving the people across the border. It's about having a positive approach involving the different states. And this is where my organization was created something like 30 years ago. Basically, it was first a bottom-up approach. We started with 6 pilot cross-border urban agglomerations like Genève, like Lille or Strasbourg or Basel. But there was also the French government. And it was important because we needed this support of national authorities. And now we have around 100 members, all sorts of borders, urban, rural, maritime. And we have also we are working also for the French government, but also for national governments the other side of the border. We work with cross-border groupings because now we have progressed on each border with these European groupings of territorial cooperation or Euro regions that involve the local or regional authorities. Why is it so important to have these different levels? It's of course, we have to support the local actors to act, and they have the competency to develop public services or to develop planning, but they should do it also across the border. But at a certain moment, they meet some limits, some problems with national regulations, because even if you have a European framework in Europe, it's not a federal state Europe. It's a union of states, so the states are still very present in regulations, and sometimes they are back to back on the border. And so we also need to take the problems sometimes to capitals like Paris, Berlin, or Roma to solve problems, to have changes of legislation or to have bilateral agreements. And this is where we need the states. And of course, at the end, we need also Europe, because it can create overall continental regulations. It can also fund the project with Interreg, but it can also help to build a multi-level governance. And so MOT, my organization, acts at these 3 levels because they are all important to help these cross-border regions to develop.
So, I mean, this is really interesting in terms of the union of states, the legislative structures that need to be brought into play. And certainly border regions are not necessarily homogenous, and they often face unique and different economic and administrative realities and barriers. What governance mechanisms have you used and have proven most effective to bring this diverse group of states and different needs and perspective aspects to also respect the sovereignty of the different neighboring jurisdictions?
Yes, you're absolutely right here. We have to respect this sovereignty because really it's one of the principles of Europe, and this subsidiarity principle. I mean, Europe should do only what is necessary and leave the states to do things, and this is where we have also to respect the diversity of the borders because each border is can be different. Some are very urban, some are less rural, and sometimes you have a big country with a small country. We have when you take France and Germany, you have a federal state, Germany, and a unitary state, which is France. So in each case, you have to develop a specific multi-level governance. So we try to provide good examples, but we don't think that we should have a sort of top-down approach. Huh? And for instance, we are rather supportive in MOT of trying to have these cross-border local or regional organizations because we think that some institutionalization can help, but it can differ on various borders. On some borders, you have a more liberal informal approach. On some borders, you have more a tradition of public action. So it depends on the borders, basically.
So again, I think one of the interesting things is the ability to share information, and in this world of big data, I think, and the question for you is sort of what role does data sharing and common metrics play in building this cooperation across borders, and what role does MOT play in
Mhm,
facilitating this knowledge
mhm.
exchange?
Mhm. Well, I like this question. I am basically before I've not worked always on borders. I've been basically I'm a special planner. I've had the opportunity to work as well at local, regional, or even national level before working at European and cross-border level. And one of my convictions as a special planner is that the first way, if you want to make special planning in a region, is to really share data. It's not only a question. Of course, you need data to make a plan, but this is a technical thing. But you also need to share data between the engineers and the politicians to take decisions, but also with the public, with the citizens, with the businesses, because the point is to share evidence and to share vision on a given territory. And for me, it's also true for cross-border territories because we really want them to be as normal as the other territories. Huh? So we would like these territories, the people living in these territories, to live, at 360 degrees. And the point is, in fact, the cross-border data, the cross-border knowledge is very weak because
Mm.
basically these statistical systems have been built by states. You hear it in the names, huh? And we had really to build these data. Of course, MOT didn't do everything. Basically, it started from the local level. I mean, when you are in Genève or when you are in Strasbourg, there were some big interactions, and they started to build some local knowledge and develop these statistics. What MOT did and where it was important is we made it exist first at national level in France. Paris is is a nice city, but it's far away from the borders, and so the people there were not really aware of all that. And for instance, we made the first map of cross-border workers at national level. In France, it's more than 400,000 people that cross the border nearly every day. And the ministries in Paris, they didn't know that. So we made that. It has changed. And now we have really the National Institute for Statistics, which produces data also cross border. And so we succeeded on that. And at the European level, it was the same. Of course, you can tell me, well, there is a Eurostat, which is a directorate of the European Commission that produces data. coming from the national or regional data, but they didn't have a cross-border approach, in fact. And we convinced the Commission to progress. Now they have started to make some studies, and now you have a website where you can find this sort of data. And the role of MOT is more to, to advertise the importance of observation, to go between the levels, to coordinate the network of local observatories, and to raise awareness. And we do that with other organizations in Europe, like the Association of European Border Regions, for instance. So we try to facilitate across the scales, I would say.
And is it an easy process in terms of sharing that information, or is it a bit push and shove sometimes to get that information?
It's really, it's really difficult. The point is, it's really in the heads, you have the local people living near the border. They obviously know that. As any human or even animal or on the earth, people try to use their territory around. So these people don't need to be convinced. But when you are far, you have really a difficulty to it's not only about if you take the cross-border workers, it's not only about knowing the fact that there are cross-border workers. You have also a judgment. There are problems that are sometimes linked with these people because we have to create new infrastructure to have a sustainable transport, or you have discrepancies between the fiscal or social systems, and so it's complex. And some people would say, well, but these guys they could stay in their country. Why do they have to cross the border? So you have to explain. It's not only about data. It's about, yes, the people have the right to cross borders if it's better for them, and it's also a good thing for the community, and it's a win-win game, and we have to explain that all the time.
Yeah, and that's interesting because it sort of leads me to the next question in and around, like, why are these people having to move? And what's the issue about, enabling these opportunities for transition across borders? One of the things that we're facing now is this rapidly shifting geopolitical landscape. And so, which makes this a little bit more difficult at times. So what strategies has MOT developed to maintain collaboration during these points of political strain and shifts in attitudes?
Yes, of course. I will be rather modest on that topic. We are all very much aware of these geopolitics that are threatening, by the way. To be very specific, MOT works mainly on borders around France, so in Western Europe, where there is obviously less tension than in Eastern Europe. So I will not speak about what happens on these borders, but I can tell you that when you're in Poland or all these countries, they are really concerned. But I would say even in Western Europe, and to stay on this border issue, the world is changing. And not always in the good direction. I would say. I would say that since something like 10 years, before 2015. We were thinking that in Western Europe, the borders were open, and our duty in MOT was to organize the cross-border local development. But since 2015, you had a number of, I would say, these geopolitical questions that came back to the border. There were the terrorist attacks in France, where the state started to sometimes to close the border because to try to control terrorism. Then you had, of course, the migration crisis with this difficulty to manage the migrants. In MOT, we are rather, of course, in favor of have a rather positive attitude towards all that, but it's something that is difficult for states to try to control, And we are also convinced that it's better to do it through cooperation between states and at European level. But at the local level, there was a sort of contradiction. Do you open the borders to have a crocodile life, or do you try to control the people? So, of course, it was very much the most important experiment we had, like in all the planet, was, of course, the COVID crisis, where suddenly the states discovered that, in fact, when they wanted to close the border to protect their populations, then they interrupted some life that could be endangering their own citizens. Luxembourg asked France to leave the border open because the people the medicine and the nurses in the Luxembourg hospitals, they mainly come from France or Germany, so they had to leave the border open. And so what I would like to say is, there is a sort of contradiction between the general, atmosphere of fear and people thinking that, well, they should protect against the other countries and all that, and the fact that, in fact, the solution is mostly on cooperation. At least in Europe, we can say that we want to cooperate even more on each border and at the European level. So, I mean, we have to fight against things that are in the head and that you measure through, for instance, the vote. On some border regions around France, you have a rise of abstention or even nationalist vote, even in these regions that are supposed to benefit from the European integration. So I would say, yes, MOT tries really to explain, to advertise and to communicate about the fact that borders still exist. We don't contest that, but that cooperation is better than wanting to take back control. Huh?
So it really has an organic sensibility about how you integrate and how you talk about these particular issues, given the immediacy of the issues at the border itself and the relationship with a certain country. Who might be the key sort of players that you would reach out to in these moments, especially when you have potentially competing interests from state to state? But who is it you would normally reach out to sort of address these particular issues, or at least have the conversation about what those needs are?
Yes, again, I will say that as a planner, I think that there is no big particularity about this border region, because in any case, it's always a question of trying to make a win-win game between, public authorities, firms, NGOs working on environment, citizens. What we want to make in border regions is exactly what to make in any region in the world. I mean, trying to have local communities moving towards a more sustainable development, inclusive and all that. The point is, of course, that there is still these borders. And so this is where we need to create and to work with specific stakeholders. And sometimes we have to create them. Basically, we are convinced in MOT that we need to have some cross-border groupings at local level. If you take, for instance, again, Geneva, you need to have a place and people that work for as well the Swiss part, which is the Canton de Genève, République Canton de Genève, and the French suburbs. And so you need to create a sort of a small institution that gathers the politicians and with some technical officers that develop plans and some knowledge. Sometimes it's very small organizations because they just coordinate the different parts of the border. So I would say that, yes, we need also specific stakeholders like a local grouping or like an Euroregion. If you take another scale, if you take I come back to the French-Spanish border, which is the Pyrenees, so it's a mountain. There you have Communauté de Travail des Pyrénées, which involves all the French and Spanish regions, and they work together to coordinate, to plan, and they also manage directly the Interreg program. And so this is, of course, a major stakeholder, but I will not quote everybody, because one of the points is that these institutions are generally overlapping because it's functional areas. And so people have difficulties to understand that. It's not, this classical geography of Russian puppets with Russian dolls, with you have the state, and then you have the region, and then you have the local authorities. It's also about functional overlapping regions. And so this is complex, but we need these stakeholders, and we need to, as you said, we need to organize the conversation and explain that it's not, of course, it's complex because life is complex, but this is necessary to build something positive for the populations.
And I mean, this is a really interesting piece, because one of the things that I'm constantly interested in is how do we build the skill sets or the competencies for these kinds of relationships to unfold. And for those of us who are in the works of building these partnerships and these frameworks and dealing with the day-to-day reality of these border dynamics, from your perspective, what are some of the important skills and competencies we need to start thinking about? How do we build and support as we move into the next decade of our sort of cross-border realities?
I would say something that might seem obvious, but in fact, we have to repeat and repeat. I would say the first thing is, Europe is diverse, also from a linguistic perspective. So I would say first, learn the language of the neighbor, because on many borders there are two languages, and there is sometimes also a local language, and perhaps we should move towards a win-win game. I mean, it's possible not only to speak English but also to speak the language of the neighboring country. It's not only about language; it's also about multicultural, the capacity to act in a multicultural context. And again, I mean. Some people are critical about, they say, well, too much multicultural, we have to come back to these identities and so on. But it's irrelevant, because in fact, in a country, in a territory like Europe, the history of Europe is diverse, and the reality of Europe is multicultural, and you are always at these dimensions. I would say that. There is perhaps also another dimension, which is the interdisciplinarity. Basically, like any territory, trying to have cross-border governance or to have cross-border spatial planning, it's about planning. It's about working on as well economy, politics, functional integration, but it's also about culture or even ethics. I mean, the point is also about the way persons act when there is a crisis. And coming back to the COVID crisis, it's the persons who reacted against the states. The states they were not naughty states. I mean, they didn't want to be aggressive, but they closed the borders, and the local politicians or the local civil servants that were at the border, they had to take on their own commitment. They had no routine, and they had to commit personally. And I think that this capacity to, people are supposed to respect legislation, but I don't say that we should ask people not to respect that. But there, sometimes you have to think beyond also, I would say, mental borders. And I would say that, yes, you need these skills and competencies that are as well across the border culturally, but also across the borders between disciplines, and this is very concrete, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's an element that we sometimes forget. It's about relationships. It's about the human interaction and the ability to sort of recognize that and utilize that as a certain skill set, that relationship building. Also, I think you pointed out it's leadership. It's about taking that role and understanding what that is in terms of those relationships. But agility and flexibility and analytical thinking in those moments are also very important for the dynamics of that relationship and that environment. So that's really great because I think that's something we sometimes forget about. These are attributes and skills that are important as we interact in these spaces. So we've actually come to the end of our time, unfortunately, and I don't see any questions. So I just to respect everyone's time and the allotment that we've put in place. But I do want to thank you, Jean, for guiding and supporting this remarkable conversation. And as you and I have said, we could go on for hours here, and we hope to have that opportunity in the future. But I want to thank you for your frankness, your expertise, and certainly for your willingness to start this conversation, because I think this is, as I say, the start of many more. And so thank you very much, Jean, and I appreciate your time. I'd also like to thank the Borders and Governance Lab for sponsoring this webinar and for the lab's commitment to providing a platform for critical discussions like this and the development of evidence-based solutions. And for more information, please go to www.bigglobalization.org for many more of these opportunities and the work that Big is also doing for us. Now, I also remind you that to sign up for the next two webinars, May 14th, when Ben Robar, the CEO of Lantern, will be joining us, and Peter Schwartz, the co-founder and chief science officer from Altana, will be on May 28th. And I look forward to seeing you all next week on our May 14th webinar. Thank you very much for joining us, folks, and truly appreciate your time. And again, Jean, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you as well. And hello to the colleagues I see on the list. Some of them, I know them. Hello.
Take care, folks.